It says that the host has stopped in this chat. Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. Lexi, can you make me host? Are you able to share your screen?
Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Can y'all see what I'm seeing here, my little presentation?
Yes, we can. All right, so you can
So,
go ahead and get started then.
cool. So, I guess you guys can't see me, but you guys had a little introduction about me. So hopefully you know a little bit about me. I have a little bit of introduction stuff in here, but what I wanted to talk about today is I wanted to talk about a couple of different barriers that face pre-meds. And there's a lot of them. The pre-med process has no shortage of barriers to people based on gender and race and economics and any other list of things that you can describe. But so a little bit about me and my introduction is the reason I got so into this is I took some time off between undergrad and medical school. And one of the things I was doing was working as a high school teacher in Dallas, in kind of the, I'd say, inner city area of Dallas. And when I was there, I noticed such a stark difference in the educational experience, just overall, that the kids in the school I was working at had versus the educational experience I had versus the educational experience a lot of pre-meds that I went to undergrad or grad school or am now in medical school with had. I also noticed that when I spoke about my interest in medicine at that school, so many of the students there thought that becoming a doctor or physician was just unachievable for them. That there's no way that they could do this because the pre-med process is a pay to win, so to speak, kind of process, where you need to have a certain level of income, you need to have access to the best schools in the world and tutoring and any other kind of resource in order to succeed and get into medical school. And so I know you guys are not here to hear about my experience in, again, being a high school teacher. What you guys probably care about more is how I got into medical school. And I graduated college with 3.7, 3.07, not 3.7, I wish it was 3.7, 3.07 cumulative GPA. My first diagnostic MCAT score was really bad. It was in the 480s somewhere. I was trying to dig through my email and figure out what it was earlier, but it was in the 480s. I needed to improve, but I didn't have access to the resources to do so. I was paying my way through college. I was working full time. In addition to my living expenses, college expenses, so on. And I really thought it was impossible for me to succeed. And I actually heard that same sentiment expressed by, let's see, the pre-med advising office at my university, the dean of the honors program I was in. I sat down with him at some point. I think it was toward the start of my senior year, and he knew all my statistics. Obviously, he knew my undergrad GPA and all that kind of stuff. And I distinctly remember him telling me the exact words he's told me were that I should consider a lateral move and I should work in healthcare administration or public health or something else like that. And this was someone who I really, really respected. And, he's obviously the dean of my honors college. I'd taken a class with him. His wife was actually a medical doctor. I'd met her before and she was on the admissions committee of his medical school. So obviously, this guy knew what he's talking about. And that that was really troubling for me, obviously, because again, it comes back to this idea of I thought my dream, my goal was just impossible to achieve, right? I thought there's no way we could do it. But here we are in medical school. There's a lot of students that have no parental support or who's have low income for various reasons. And so there's a lot of students like me who have to work full time in college, and that kind of negatively affects your grades because when you're working 40 to 50 hours a week, it takes away from how much time you can really spend on your studies. And pre-med classes are hard. They're hard for a reason, but they're hard. Luckily, I was blessed enough. I got a scholarship to undergrad, and between the scholarship and my full-time job, I could keep up with my living expenses and college expenses and stuff like that. But I wasn't able to afford the same kind of resources to succeed, like tutoring and MCAT prep and things like that, that a lot of other students were able to do. I was constantly worried about how I was going to pay for medical school. There's a lot of people who have this idea of if I can't pay for medical school, what is the point of me grinding so hard in undergrad to get into something that I can't afford? And this is it's something that troubles a lot of students. And I really like what the previous speaker was saying, the Nike logo, right? Just do it. Just do it. You can worry about the payment. There's so many different loan options and scholarship options. So actually, I'm in medical school right now. I just started my first year, and I am taking the military HPSP scholarship, where I don't have to worry about the cost of medical school because I agreed to some service as a military physician afterward. And if you guys have any questions specifically about that military medicine aspect, you can feel free to ask a little bit late. We'll get to that down the road a little bit here. So there is what's known as the FAP or fee waiver program, which does help a little bit offset the cost of pre-med things, whether that's application fees or medical school prep or resources for the MCAT or et cetera, et cetera. However, there are some limitations to that program. We'll get into those in a little bit further down the road here. But so what I want to talk about, actually, the first thing I want to talk about is this myth that a lot of people have that medical school, or the admissions to medical school at least, are easier for certain groups of people, certain racial groups, than other racial groups. And the way that I want to look at that is we have some application data that I pulled from, this data is all pulled from AAMC. It's pulled for the most recent application year. And so we can kind of see by race, this is for applicants. And so their average MCAT score. And if we flip to the next table, we can see what it is for matriculants, which are people who've obviously gotten accepted to medical school. So actually, one thing that I noticed is one of the best ways that we can really compare this data is we can take a look at the difference between these two things. So here's the applicants. So this is the whole field, right? This is the application, acceptance rates in medical school are not that great. You guys probably have some idea of that, but it's around 40%. So this is for the 100%, or everybody is applying. And if we flip to the next table over here, this is for the matriculants. This is for the 40% or so, 41% that actually get accepted to medical school. And one thing that we can do in order to assess the difficulty of different groups of people getting into medical school is we can take a look at the difference. So I know there's a lot of numbers on this table. I've done a little math magic for you guys, and I've come up with the difference between those things. And so the average Asian student who is accepted to medical school has a MCAT score of 5.9 above the average and has a GPA of 0.15 above the average for Asian students. We see the same thing with Black students, Latinx students, white students, and so on. And the reason I say that this is actually such an important stat is because it gives us a picture of the difficulty for different groups of students to get into medical school. So for Asian students, you got to beat the average by about 5.9. For African American students, or I guess I shouldn't say African American students, because I happen to know a lot of students who have immigrated here very recently from different African countries and are still applying to medical school and face many of the same obstacles that African American students face. But so we'll say Black students here. And so the actual difference for Black students, the applicants and the matriculants, if you look at their MCAT scores, the difference there is about 8.1. And the difference in the GPA is about 0.18. And actually, these numbers right here correlate really, really well with the acceptance rates for these different groups of people. And you can actually take a look at those acceptance rates right there. So at the top of the list, we have white students who have the lowest difference between their accepted stats and their applicant stats. And so white students on average get into med school about 45% rate. And we also have Asian students, which are kind of next on the list. There's about a 5.9 difference between Asian students who are accepted and Asian students who apply. That's correlates to 44%. We're going down just a little bit, not too huge of a jump. And there's next thing was the Latinx students. Oops. And so the 43%. And we see a really steep drop off, obviously, in those percentages between all of the other students and the Black students. And so that does correlate right here with the difference in the differences. The difference between the applicants and the matriculated Black students is huge compared to the other groups of students. And there are multiple reasons for this difference, obviously. There are a lot of different programs nowadays that are aimed at kind of alleviating this inequality in medical school admissions. However, we have to know that this data is literally from this year. It is from 2019 to 2020, which is the year that I applied to medical school. It's the year of students that are starting right now. And there is still a huge difference, even though there are countless programs that are aimed at helping minority students get into medical school. So that leads us to the question of what's going on there. So, and obviously there is a perpetual running myth, right, that medical school admissions are simply easier for African American or Latinx students, whereas the data shows that that's not really true. The data shows that actually African American and Latinx students are still accepted at a much lower rate than white or Asian students, even though it is true that we can look at the matriculated data and we can see that the MCAT scores and actually the GPAs as well for these students is a little bit lower. The average accepted MCAT score for Black students and for Latino students or Latinx students is a bit lower than the accepted range for Asian and white students. However, if you look at the acceptance rates are still lower. So even though we are trying to adjust our requirements in order to promote diversity, we're not 100% of the way there yet. I did want to show you guys this YouTube video. I have not had a great history with showing YouTube videos via screen share. Sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. And what I want to get at with this YouTube video is really, why am I equating race and socioeconomic status and all of these things? We talk about them a lot as if they are the same thing, as if we talk about being of a minority class as being of low income. That doesn't hold true for all people, obviously. There are plenty of minorities who are very, very wealthy and well off. But I do want to show you guys this video here. And we can kind of see why we can equate these things so much. You want to make sure the sounds work. Are y'all able to hear the sound on the video?
Yes, you can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Signa Mary McKernan, economist and senior fellow at the Urban Institute. If I asked you, would you rather have over $1 million or 160,000 in 30 years? What would you choose? Now consider this. What if for every dollar you earned, someone else earned too? How about if for every dollar of wealth you gained, someone else gained 6? In 1983, whites in their 30s had an average net worth of $184,000. Today, these whites, who are in their early 60s, have accumulated $1.1 million in wealth. In contrast, blacks have seen their wealth go from $54,000 to $161,000, and Hispanics from $46,000 to $226,000. The racial wealth gap grows sharply with age. Over the past 3 decades, wealth disparities continued to worsen. Though the United States is one of the wealthiest countries, to many Americans this prosperity remains out of reach. Blacks and Hispanics, who strive to make a better life for themselves and their families, do not have the same asset-building opportunities. They're less likely to own homes and retirement accounts, so miss out on these traditionally powerful wealth-building tools. Wealth is where economic opportunity lies. Setting up automated savings drawn from your income allows you to build wealth through education, your home, or your retirement savings. Lack of assets, on the other hand, means a difficult life. When a rainy day hits, you're unable to pay bills and don't have enough food to eat. Our social safety net targets the day-to-day costs of living, but without fair policies, such paths to building wealth vanish. Today, these avenues are harder to access because it's tougher to qualify for home loans. To make matters worse, wealth disparities are passed from generation to generation. Black and Hispanic families are 5 times less likely than white families to inherit money that can help with down payments on a home. In order to narrow the racial wealth gap, we need to lower the barriers to building assets. Here's where things stand. In 2009, over half the $400 billion the federal government spent encouraging families to build assets went to the top 5% of income earners. Meanwhile, low-income families received next to nothing. Now imagine you have the same opportunity to earn income and gain financial security as anyone else. If that's the course we want to set, wealth is where the economic opportunity lies.
Well, I hope you guys saw what I was trying to get at here is that, we talk about all these things, like maybe the reasons for these gaps are that lower income students are not able to afford the same kind of resources as higher income students. However, that we also see that stark difference in just the racial statistics. And there is a correlation there. There's a intricate and hard to remove correlation there. There's no amount of statistical manipulation that can get rid of the fact that race and income are intricately tied together in this country and in a lot of countries. So we can take a look at various things that kind of play into that. One of the really big ones is school funding, right? It's intricately tied to school income at all levels. And as far as public schools goes, it's also very highly tied to the idea of race. Neighborhoods that are predominantly African American or predominantly Latino have lower income people in them, and those people's income is directly correlated to the income or the funding of the school. And so, on average, minority students go to lower income schools and throughout their entire school career. So there are a lot of programs to help lower income and minority students get into medical school. However, a lot of the damage is done by the time we even get to the medical school point, right? So we can look at these applicant statistics and we can think about why are these numbers so starkly different? Even in applicants as a whole, there's an almost 10-point difference between Asian or white applicants to medical school and minority applicants, or minority in terms of medicine, applicants to medical school. And that really correlates with this idea that students in those minority groups are at lower quality schools throughout their entire academic career. And by the time they have gotten to medical school, they have gone through so many obstacles that are correlated in those statistics and numbers and so forth. There's also a picture of hope. Hope is a huge thing. You know, we're talking about just do it, always try. And that's easy for me to say. But it's a lot harder for me to convince a student who has no family members who have ever gone into the medical field, doesn't know any doctors, has never met in real life outside of a clinical setting, a doctor who they can talk to and receive advice from. It's really hard for me to convince them that you can be a doctor. I've heard so much in the context of my nonprofit. We gather stories from minority students, and I think about the difference between when I told my parents I want to be a doctor, and they were happy about it. They were happy. They said, "Oh, wow, that's a great thing. You want to help people. Doctors make a lot of money. You're going to be set for life, etc., etc." But that same kind of sentiment is not shared by a lot of Black or Latino families when their kids say they want to go to medical school. They say, "Can you really do it? We don't know anyone who's gone to medical school. Can you really do it? We don't know." We're not trying to disrespect or trample on your dreams, but the fact remains that we don't know anyone who's accomplished it. So how do we know that you can accomplish it? And I really think that's why ideas like these mentorship programs, which I'll talk a little bit about down the road, really come into play, because students who have no connections in the medical field, connections are everything. They feel like they won't be able to get into medical school. And it's not because they feel like they're not smart enough, it's because they feel like they don't understand. They don't understand the application process. They don't understand what the MCAT is, how to take the MCAT. And those are really important things to build. There are a lot of programs to help low income and minority students. So as far as the application services or AAMC itself, they're what are referred to as the FAP or the fee waiver programs, which are generally tied to your family income. And I do have some complaints about that. As for a lot of students who are not in touch with their family or have family abuse situations or things like that, maybe tying it to family income is not the most reliable indicator of whether that student is able to pay for medical school. I will say that for students that do have family support, the cutoffs are pretty generous. The cutoffs for a 4-person family, so the parents and 2 children, to get into the FAP program and have your medical school applications paid for is something like $102,000 or $103,000 a year. And that's actually a lot of money. That is a lot of money for the AMCAS to determine that you're a low income student. It kind of goes to show, honestly, on the converse side, what the average income of a medical school's applicant is. If $103,000 a year is considered low income for medical school applicants, consider what the average income for medical school applicants is. I don't happen to know that number. I don't know that AMC publishes it, but that means it's quite a bit higher than that $103,000 or $104,000. There are a lot of pathway programs that are a little bit newer. These are popping up everywhere, it seems now, where they're only open to minority students or low-income students or students who face some kind of hardship or difficulty in life. And they generally, they might operate on the same way as something like a special master's program, where you take classes alongside the medical students. And if you meet a certain grade cutoff, you are able to actually matriculate into that medical school's class. And these programs, again, they do have their limitations. They have the same kind of application process where people are applying with their GPAs and MCAT scores, and they're having to kind of prove themselves. So it's once more we have this thing where we're expecting minority students to jump through more hoops, right? We're expecting them to jump through more hoops, prove themselves at another level, at a level of competition that most students would not have to go through. So I happen to know, I did a special master's program at Georgetown University, and we had one of these smart pathway programs there. The cutoff was rough. In order for one of the students in the pathway program to matriculate into Georgetown Medical School, they had to be getting A's and B's. it wasn't just you just have to pass the medical courses. You actually have to do better. You have to do at the medical school average or just above the medical school average in order to matriculate into the medical school. So the the low income or the minority students to get into the medical school are still having to perform at the average level or higher than a lot of the medical school students there, which sounds crazy. But that's the way a lot of those programs work. There is also this idea of affirmative action admissions in which we have, that sliding scale of, as far as statistical requirements, at least for low income or minority students to get into medical school. And I feel like, this whole affirmative action thing has gotten a really bad rap lately in terms of, we don't want to talk about it. There's lawsuits and court cases and so forth that revolve around this idea of affirmative action. I don't like that. I think affirmative action is a great thing, even if we're not talking about the justice aspect of it. Let's put the fact that we should have it aside for a second. And actually, students who get into school on affirmative action type situations are actually much more likely to take public service jobs, governmental jobs, run for Senate, run for Congress, run for federal government positions where they can help other people in their same position than students who don't, who are not benefited by affirmative action. And so I think affirmative action is a really great thing that helps a lot of people get opportunities that they otherwise would not have access to. And the statistics show that people who are benefited by this program help others. So that's a really great thing. As far as MCAT prep specifically goes, there's a lot of great resources. Khan Academy is one of them. Khan Academy is kind of the most well-known as far as MCAT stuff goes, where they have a lot of free videos and whatnot that may not be the perfect replacement for something like Kaplan or Princeton Review course, but they are there. They are there. And you, as far as the content goes, if you don't know your biochemistry or whatever to prepare for the MCAT, then you can always go check out Khan Academy and get access to those same resources. My nonprofit, Free the MCAT, which I'll show you guys a little bit of toward the end here, does very similar stuff. We try and provide, as far as that content or that preparing for the MCAT type stuff goes, we try and provide those similar resources to anybody who wants it. There's no cost, there's nothing associated with that. There's a lot of free other MCAT resources. I happen to know people who do free MCAT tutoring. I don't think I know anyone who does one-on-one free tutoring. There's a lot of free group classes and things like that that are available to students, especially lower income students. And I'm happy to connect you guys with any of that stuff. In my email and for my nonprofit address down there at the bottom. I'll post that in the chat a little bit later. It's freethemcat@gmail.com. You can always contact me there. I'm happy to direct you to whatever resources you're looking for. We can also direct you to, like we talked about, those pathway programs or those mentorship programs who really specialize in connecting people to others in the same situation as them. To others in the same situation as you. Oops, switch away from that. Okay. And so we have all these programs. However, the statistics still show that these programs are not really enough. They're not fully bridging the divide between what is needed and what is out there. Among active physicians, about greater than 50% are white, 17% are Asian, about 5-ish% are Latinx or African American each, respectively. Oops. But that has absolutely no correlation, seemingly, with the actual minority statistics in the United States, which is really crazy. Hispanics can consist of about 18% of the population and only 5.8% of physicians. African Americans consist of about 13% of the population, only 5% of physicians. Asian Americans consist of about 6% of the population, but 17% of physicians. So even though we have all these programs that are trying to help bridge this gap, there's something we're missing. There's something we're missing. And I'll talk a little bit toward the end of what exactly I think that is. But the fact remains that there's a lot more work to be done in this arena to bridge this divide here. I also did want to acknowledge down at the bottom, the statistical analysis of all of these things gets a little bit trickier as we start talking about students and physicians who don't fit neatly into these racial groups, students who are multiracial or are of different racial backgrounds that don't exactly fall into Asian, Black, Hispanic, whatever. In the interest of time, keeping this presentation simple, I didn't want to go into every single one of them, but I do want to acknowledge that defining race through such broad strokes has its inherent limitations. So that brings me to my question of why am I talking to y'all today? Now, a lot of this stuff feels like something I should be bringing up to a medical school, that I should be, calling the medical schools at Harvard and NYTCOM where I go, and every other medical school. And I should be talking to them about what should you be doing in order to bridge this divide. But I'm not. I'm here talking to y'all. And so why am I talking to y'all? Obviously, most of the people in this chat or in this call do not have the power to change medical school admission policies as much as we wish we could. We wish that we could create these programs. We wish that we could change the application policies in medical schools. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily true. I don't have the power to change any medical school application policies, though maybe one day I will. Maybe one day a lot of people in this chat will. So change is implemented at the top, but it's inspired from the bottom. It is hard to change the minds of people already in power. Changing minds and inspiring people to create change happens at this stage, right? When we're in the application process, we are a little bit more malleable. We're a little bit more willing to form new beliefs that we can then carry with us through our medical journeys and our journeys in medical school, our journeys, hopefully one day becoming staff at medical school, serving on admission committees, serving on having the power to make these decisions and change things. It is important to have diversity in the healthcare field. And it seems like a crazy thing to say, but a lot of people don't believe me when I say this kind of stuff. And so it is important. Let's prove for a second why it's important. I talk about only 5% of Hispanic or physicians are Black. Why is that a problem? There is the justice aspect of it, but I don't. It is an important part of it. I don't like to lean too heavily on that in the interest of discussing with people. It tends not to change people's minds. What does change people's minds is the idea that health incomes are intricately tied with the diversity of your physician workforce. Here's a study, this is done in the 90s, and it's basically looking at what they call ambulatory care sensitive conditions, which is a really fancy way of saying health incomes, right? Of saying health outcomes. And what they showed is that areas that have greater physician diversity and adequate supply of physicians have lower risk of having what they call these ACSH conditions. They showed less hospitalization, physician placement in underserved areas, and areas that are educating minority physicians are correlated with much better health outcomes down the road. There was a really good study I saw the other day. I didn't include it in my PowerPoint. I was wanting to include it in my PowerPoint, but it slipped my mind. That showed that African-American babies, there's a lot of controversy now where pregnant mothers who are African-American have much worse outcomes than of any other race, and so does small children, infants and NICU admissions and things like that for minority patients. However, this study showed that children who are taken care of by physicians who are of the same race as them, I think it was African Americans in that study, have much better health outcomes than infants who are taken care of by physicians of a different racial groups. And so it is really important to have that diversity. If we have 13% of our population as African American, but only 5% of our physicians are African American, there's no way that all the African American patients can have African American doctors or have access to African American physicians. There's simply too much of an inequity there. And there's also the idea of why I'm talking to y'all about this is it's very important for future physicians to build a couple of core skills. The two that I want to talk about right now are empathy is one of them. Obviously, empathy is a huge thing that all physicians need to have. You wouldn't want to go to a physician who has no ability to kind of connect with you and understand what you're going through. the messed up thing about it is undergraduate science grades are inversely correlated with empathy scores. So when we try and quantify people's empathy, the best way to identify which people have high empathy is to look at the people who are not doing so well in undergraduate science classes. Unfortunately, that's not what medical schools are looking at. Medical schools obviously are directly correlated with undergraduate science grades. Physicians should be smart. Physicians should know science, and physicians should be able to do well in biology and biochemistry and chemistry, et cetera, but they also need to be empathetic. We can teach people science. We can teach people biology and biochemistry, anatomy, pathology, how to diagnose, how to treat disease. It's a lot harder to teach empathy. It is a lot harder to teach an unempathetic person to be empathetic than it is to teach someone who's not so great at biology how to diagnose disease. And so it's important that we build an educational process and an application process that cultivates physicians who have strong empathy. I also want to talk about this term. This is something I did not know too much about. Maybe a lot of people here in this chat might have heard of, and the call may have heard about this, but this is something I recently learned about in medical school over the last couple of weeks as I've started my medical school journey. It's cultural compatibility. And I know y'all are saying, oh, that's a made up word. It's not a real word. I don't listen to this because it's a fake word. It's a made up word. Spoiler alert. It's not a real word. If you type it into your Word document, you'll get a little angry red squiggly line that tells us it's not in the dictionary. But it's an important term. Let me tell you why. We have this, a lot of people talk about this term of cultural competence, where I guess I have my definition of cultural competence right here. I don't have to come up with one. So cultural competence is viewed as the cornerstone of fostering cross-cultural communication, reducing health disparities, improving access to better care, increasing health literacy, and promoting health equity. And what cultural competence kind of revolves around is knowing about all the different cultures you might run into. So if I want to be a physician in a heavily Hispanic area, there's my background. I grew up in Texas and Dallas, and there's a lot of Hispanic patients around. I should know a lot about the Hispanic culture, and that is going to make me a better physician. Well, that will make me a better physician. But cultural competence has limits. And the reason that cultural competence has limits is because no one can know everything. We can try and know everything, and we want to know everything, especially as future physicians. But there is a 99.99999% chance that one day in your medical career, you will run into someone from a culture that you know nothing about. What happens if one day you're in the clinic and you run into a patient from Tibet or the Uyghur people who are currently facing persecution in China, or from a small Native American tribe you've never heard of? Your cultural competency has kind of failed you. You can say, I'm culturally competent as much as you want, but your cultural competence is not going to help you interact with this patient. Cultural competence, it has a problem in the phrasing, which we make it sound like a checkbox. We can learn cultural competence. We can be culturally competent. We can put that on our resumes. We can put that under our list of skills next to, diagnosing cardiovascular disease, cultural competence, and it makes it seem like we have completed it. We're able to deal with anybody and everybody at any time. There's no cultural barriers. It's not true. It's really not true. There's also an idea of cultural humility. It's the idea that you can't know everything. That even if I meet a patient from my own culture, I'm personally Indian, if I run into an Indian patient one day, I can't go into it with the perspective that I know everything about their culture, because they're the expert on their own culture, not me. They could have a slightly different dialect or beliefs or something like that. For me, I do need to have competence. Competence is important, understanding at least big picture the different cultures of the world. But we also need to have humility. We need to have the perception that there's more out there to learn, and we need to be open to different things. And so combining these two terms, we get cultural compatibility. It is a made-up word. I know it's a made-up word, but it's important. It is an important made-up word. All words are made up. This happens to be one of the important made-up words. We need to be able to both understand other people and be open to new understanding. And so tying that back into my take-home message today is that even if you are not a Black or African American or Latinx student, learning about the differences and the barriers that those students face can help you. It can help anybody really who wants to go into medicine, because learning about those barriers gives you insights into the experiences of those people. And by extension is going to give you insight into the experiences of your patients and of your fellow human beings and of all of those good things. The sad truth is we can't know everything about everyone, especially if we're painting with broad strokes, right? If I try and characterize all Black people or all Latinx people under one umbrella and one statistical category, I'm going to miss a lot of stuff. I really am. So we also need to have those other two skills, which are tied together as cultural compatibility. But in the interest of giving out terms, competency is developing the skill of learning and listening to different group people and being open to their input. And humility is accepting the fact that we can't learn everything. So there's never unfortunately, this is a marathon that we're never going to get to the finish line of, right? We're going to keep running. Hopefully, if you want to be a physician, you got to keep running down this road. There's no finish line. There's never a goal that you can run through where you can now say, I'm culturally competent. I don't need to be open to people anymore because I know everything about every culture in the world and I am the expert. In terms of cultural compatibility, that's never going to happen, unfortunately. It can happen in terms of cardiology. It can happen in terms of neurology. Maybe if you're really smart and you're really lucky, maybe you can know everything about the human heart. Maybe you can know everything about the human brain. So, there's difficulties associated with that as well, but there is a more definite finish line for something like that versus knowing about every single culture and every single person in the world. I also want to emphasize, we talked a lot about medical school applications, the barriers that low-income students face. We talked about those statistics, and some of the statistics are rough. 38% of Black students get into medical school, low 40s of all the other students get into medical school. Medical school applications are hard for everyone. They're also achievable for everyone. So I don't want to say all these things and all these statistics and turn people off to the idea that you can do this, because that was what was done to me, right? When I was in college and I didn't have the best grades and I didn't have this thing or that thing, a lot of people told me I couldn't do it. They told me, oh, you can't do it because you don't have the grades. You are an Asian student and there are higher statistical benchmarks for you. You're starting off with a 400 and whatever MCAT score, and there's no way you can raise your MCAT score high enough. Hate exists for a reason. Hate exists to scare you away from things, but don't let it scare you away from this. Don't let it scare you away from pursuing medicine, because because going through all that and going through all those barriers is going to make you a better doctor one day down the road. Turn it into your passion. My passion for a long time, which it's not exactly the most healthy thing, but it was proving those people wrong. It really was proving those people who told me that I couldn't be a doctor. I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted more than anything to get into medical school, to be an amazing doctor, and to shove it in their face, right? Like to show them, you told me I couldn't do this, but I achieved it. I did. I really wanted that. And now, down the road when I'm actually here, that seems so much less important to me. It seems like I don't feel the need to go, hit up my old professor or the dean of my honors college from undergrad and say, I got into medical school and you said I couldn't do it. But for a long time, that kind of stuff was my motivation. So don't let people's hate of you scare you away from things. If you can't ignore it and just throw it out of your mind, that's even better. It's a little healthier than what I did. But if you can't, turn it into your motivation. Prove them wrong every single day of your life, and be the person that proves them wrong. And I did prove that guy wrong. And in case you guys are curious, I improved my MCAT score by about 30 points. I improved it from a 480 something when I took my first diagnostic score to a 522, which is the only reason I got into medical school. I worked every day of my life for years to do that. And it's achievable for anyone. It really is. Anyone can do it. I spend a lot of time as an MCAT shooter, and I'm available to y'all. If y'all need that kind of help, you can reach out to me personally. You can reach out to my nonprofit, and I think anyone can do it. Anyone can, a 35 to 40 point increase is extreme. Not a lot of people have the time and to do that. But just because your diagnostic score, I've seen so many people who take their first diagnostic score, it's like 490, whatever, and they're like, I can't do it. And I tell all of them, my diagnostic score was worse. It really was. It was so bad. And it's not like my GPA made up for it. My GPA was just another negative factor on that application. But you can do it. You can do it. There's a lot of people out there who are willing to help you for free if you can't afford resources like Kaplan or Princeton Review or et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole list of things you can pay for. But there's a lot of people out there who are willing to help you for free just for the fact of knowing that they helped someone who's going to be a great doctor. And if you guys are able to find those resources on your own, more power to you. If you're not, feel free to always reach out to me. You guys can check out my website. So you guys can check that out at freethemcat.org. And we have a lot of good resources up on here for students to check out as they're studying for the MCAT. It's not always this slow. But I know a lot of people struggle with cars. We have our little cars section going where you can watch videos of me talking through some cars passages. I have a bunch of little classes down here. I think I have 6 classes. Oh, there's 5 classes right here. There's a 6th one I'm going to upload tonight, actually, where you can talk about the cars section. There's also our biology resources where we can kind of go through. I'm not going to bore y'all by going through all of it, but you can take a look at the notes, and they serve as kind of content review for the different sections of the MCAT. And I promise it's just my internet. The internet's so slow. Maybe because I'm on Zoom. And so you can kind of click through all this stuff and serve as a content review for MCAT. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do it, ever. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do it. Don't let them tell you you're not smart enough. Don't let them tell you you don't have the money. Don't let them tell you that because you are of a certain race or a certain gender or a certain anything, honestly. Don't let them tell you you can't do it. Ignore it, prove them wrong every single time. I firmly believe in that, and I'm willing to help you do it if that's what it takes. Okay, so that is pretty much what I had, and I guess we have some questions I'm trying to answer here.
Yeah, so we're going to move on to questions. Thank you so much for that presentation, Josh. Okay, so first question someone had was, what resources did you use for MCAT studying? I guess they said before you retook it, but I assume also after.
Sure. So what resources I use for MCAT studying? Well, actually, the core of my problem with MCAT was for a lot of students who have lower GPAs and are trying to score highly on the MCAT, the chance is that if you have a lower GPA, now this doesn't apply to everybody, is that you probably don't know all the content that you need to know for your MCAT. Now, I didn't do well in biochem, and there's a lot of factors that win. There's the fact that I didn't do well in biochem or organic chemistry or whatever. But if you let those factors be an excuse for you, it's going to hold you back from acknowledging the fact that you're going to need to learn biochem for the MCAT and for medical school and your future career in general. So the first thing you need to do is shore up on all your content. There's a lot of resources that personally I use a lot of Khan Academy. I was able to get the books. I got the Princeton Review books. I got this big book set. I wasn't able to afford the courses and all that stuff, but I was able to afford the book set. And for a lot of people, that helps. And they're able to just read through the books and read through, thousands and thousands of pages of content and get the content. For a lot of people, like me, they preferred in a more accessible or interactive form. I think Khan Academy is a great resource for that. Khan Academy has a lot of videos and have little practice questions at the end that you can do. I think our website's a great resource. There's other resources like MCATreview.org. Put that in the chat, actually. MCATreview.org is another one I use heavily to shore up on my content stuff and understand what exactly I needed to know for the MCAT. And then after that, honestly, it comes down to practice. I read somewhere that the MCAT is a test of 30% what you know and 70% how you can apply it. And so the only way you can learn to apply it is to practice applying it over and over and over and over again. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, great response. So the next question we have is, do you know of any resources to help people pay for evaluations needed to get accommodations for the MCAT, if you're familiar with any?
I actually am not probably the expert on that topic. I guess we're talking about signing up for the extended time testing and things like that. And you need to have, diagnoses and whatnot in place to get that. I know that a lot of schools have resources. I'm mostly thinking of high schools on my end, because when I worked at a high school, they did have resources to test students for different learning differences that would impair their ability to take tests. I want to say that a lot of colleges and undergrad institutions do have similar resources. It is a lot harder, obviously, for students who are no longer in school. But if you guys shoot me an email, I'm happy to help you find that and do some research. Oh, I see in the chat that if you sign up for the fee assistance program through AMCAS or through AAMC, they will help you pay for those accommodation testings.
Awesome. So the next question was just a little bit about your gap years. So how many did you end up taking, and a little bit more about what you did?
Right. I took 3 gap years. And then my first gap year, I was working clinically, and I was coming off of, like I told you guys, that kind of bad news I got from my dean at school. He told me you can't apply to medical school, and my gut instinct was, I'm going to show you I can do it, and I can get into medical school. So I blindly applied to medical school with a crappy GPA, a crappy MCAT score, and so forth. And I was working clinically that first year. I was working with a neurologist in my hometown of Dallas. And I applied to medical school, didn't get in. I kind of predicted that one. But I think I needed that rejection to kind of kick me into gear. And I started taking stuff a lot more seriously from that point. I signed up for a graduate program at Georgetown University, where I kind of went there, and I went there in a different gear than I was in undergrad. And I kind of raised my GPA and stuff like that. And that helped me get into medical school a lot. It helped me rectify the GPA components of that deficiency. It also helped me out a little bit with my MCAT prep, because I was learning a lot of things that were very relevant to the MCAT. And so I graduated there. So first year I was working clinically, graduate school, and then right after grad school, I took the MCAT again, and then I spent another year working as a high school teacher.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So the next question we have is, does Free the MCAT also provide resources for assistance with compiling the medical school application materials itself? Or do you plan on initiating some sort of mentorship program in the future for personal statements?
For personal statements and things like that, we at this time do not. We do not have as much content up on our website as we like. I'd like to create a few more cars classes. We have a bunch of biology content, not so much for physics and psych and things like that. And I'd say my overall goal is to, first of all, build all those things out on our website so it can be a very comprehensive resource for people to go on there and prepare. I am considering kind of doing something like that in the future. However, I do know people who do the kind of services that you're asking for. I might not be able to offer them personally, with my time constraints being in school and working on my nonprofit and so on and so forth. But if you shoot me an email, I'm happy to kind of direct you to some resources that can help you on that.
Great. So this will be the last question before we transition. So let's see. What was the most challenging aspect, and what do you consider the most rewarding aspect of working with underserved communities, like as a teacher and, as scribing and stuff like that?
Right. I think actually there's another question. I think this is from Alexia in the chat. I'm going to try to answer these together because I think they're very interrelated. And the question in here is, how can we become more culturally aware, right? And so I think that everyone's primary goal who wants to go into the medical field, you know, there's other goals, is that hopefully you want to help people. If you want to make a lot of money, and that is the reason that you want to be a doctor, I'm here to tell you this probably isn't the most efficient way to do that. We can talk about the opportunity cost of spending, you know, what, 7, 8 years minimum in medical school and residency and so forth. You can make a lot of money doing other things in that time. If you're making it this far in your medical journey, you should be trying to help people, right? You should be, one of your primary motivations is theoretically to help people. And for me, what I really valued in helping people was I valued connecting with people who were not like me, because I know a lot of people who are like me, but when I had the opportunity to work in more underserved areas, I was really exposed to the whole spectrum of people. There are students that I'm thinking of when I was working as a high school teacher. There was one kid who had a learning disorder, and he communicated with sign language, and I actually bonded with him, kind of like a mentorship relationship with him still. There are patients I'm thinking of when I was working in the ER in Dallas, who are, you know, undocumented immigrants, and they have a whole host of problems that I never really considered in that. And so my reward for doing all that was I just got to see like the spectrum of the human experience, I guess, and it really expanded my mind, both in my personal life, and I feel like it's changed how I personally interact with other people, like my friends. I'm more open and I want to hear more of their experiences. I think it's also going to make me a much better doctor one day down the road. And, you know, coming back to how can we become more culturally aware, the only thing that you can do, you can't read about cultures in textbooks. I mean, you can read about it. I'm sure there are textbooks about cultures, but true cultural awareness and cultural competence and things like that comes with talking with people, comes with experiencing other cultures, comes with going to new places, going to a clinic, maybe if you're a pre-med student, in an area that you're not comfortable with, really getting outside your comfort zone and seeing the patients there. And maybe not just seeing them, just, you know, writing your notes and your scribing or whatever, but taking the time to talk to somebody, taking the time to talk to somebody in this new community, hear about their experiences, hear about why they're different than your experiences, hear about some problems that they might have that you can't even conceive because your life is so different.
Okay, so now we're going to transition to our next speaker. Thank you so much, Yash, for taking the time to come and speak.
Yeah, of course.
Alrighty, so I'm going to switch it over to Lexi. There we go.
Great. Hi, everybody. We're going to get started with our next session in about 2 minutes at exactly 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So don't go anywhere, stay tuned. Feel free to get up and stretch. We'll be back soon.